Okay, so welcome to the live stream today. We're going to talk about evolution and how different people are at different evolutionary stages. So if we like Martinez, he calls these different stages human beings stages A through K. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that and read something from the Book of Life, Volume 5. And I created a little flow chart today, and just to get a little overview of the different stages of evolution. But if we start with this symbol, and as always, all the symbols are copyright of Martinez Institute. If we see that in the six colored a ring of the six colors, that's a spiral cycle, and evolution goes counterclockwise. We can see that we have a little planet in evolution going clockwise towards the star here. When it reaches the star, it receives or attains cosmic consciousness. And right now, that'll take anywhere from 500 years to 3,000 years for us human beings, but to the planet it takes about 15 minutes. So the planetary being that we call Earth has a different perception of time than we have. Martinez states that we are actually human beings. We are the nervous system or the nerve cells of the planet. So the neurons and the sexual cells of the planet. And we can see that there are different, the field around the Earth representing the different categories of terrestrial mankind. We see that there are different stages in evolution that these beings on the planet are stationed at right now. We see one being here with a white ring, and that is its eternal eye, and it has an emanation of create something, and that stage in evolution, it's represented by these combination of basic energies, mostly orange, a little yellow. As evolution progresses, we see that there's more and more yellow coming until we reach the star. So the yellow is representing the love energy, neighborly love, and the orange is the killing principle of the animal kingdom. So basically we go and moving out of the animal kingdom and into the real human kingdom. So instead of dog eat dog, every man for himself, it becomes every man for his neighbor, and neighborly love. And treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. You think about others first before you think about yourself. That's the humane traits that we see in the real human kingdom that we don't see in the animal kingdom, where it's just hoarding and territorial stuff and survival. Yeah, survival of the fittest. So if we look at these transition from orange to yellow, more and more love energy, and we see that also in this symbol where there is a transition. This is called the animal and human thought climates. You see this transition from orange over here, more and more yellow coming in. So that's the same principle of more and more love energy, neighborly love, compassion, more and more human tendencies, and less animal tendencies, animal-like behavior. We see over here on the right there are two green and yellow figures, so they represent the transformation of the pole structure in the living beings. We have down here mostly green, and then eventually it becomes balanced between green and yellow, and that represent a male being down here. And where the green is dominant, it means that the being's male pole is dominant. Its primary pole is male and it's dominant, but with evolution with time, when we evolve further and further into the real human kingdom, more and more human tendencies and traits and less animal, we see that these poles become in balance. So more and more of the feminine pole will become prevalent in the male, and conversely with the female, more and more of male pole will become in a relative strength to the female pole in the female. Yes, so we're not going to get too much into that today, because other than just stating that there are these pole structures and these two poles, and the one pole is the yellow represents the pole, the female pole, which actually is the talent kernel for receiving energy, and the green, symbolizing the male pole, is the talent kernel for sending energy out, emitting, or sending energy out, and for giving out energy, and the other is the talent kernel for receiving. So those are talent kernels. The two sexual poles are actual talent kernels that we have in their superconscious mind, like we talked about last time. These talent kernels here, the male and the female pole are not depicted in this drawing, but they're in here in the X2 of the living being. So what we're going to talk about today is you see how these categories of consciousness of terrestrial human beings that are different, we are at different evolutionary stages, and that's just natural, that we are individuals and we have different perspectives and views, and we have different histories, and that's why we act differently and behave differently. And if we could just learn to accept that we are at these different evolutionary stages, there's no need to blame each other for not being what we're not. You know, how can you blame a man for being a man and not a woman, and a woman for being a woman and not a man? That's insane. Or how can you blame a monkey for being a monkey and doing what a monkey does? Or how can you blame someone from having brown eyes and not blue eyes? And I mean, that's what we're doing, right? We gotta learn to accept that we are at different evolutionary stages, and we are different, and we don't have to agree. That's okay. We can still get along. That's important. We gotta come together and get along so we can have happy lives, even though we are different evolutionary stages. So we see there's these different relative strengths between the yellow and the green, which symbolizes the different balance between the feeling and the intelligence energy, and that is what constitutes the different evolutionary stages. So with that in mind, we can go to the reading of let's see here, section 1875. Let me just see here. Okay. All uninitiated terrestrial human beings are on their way to this experience of life or initiation. So that's the great birth, where we attain cosmic consciousness. So we're all going there, but we have seen one can be derailed on this way. We see therefore two groups of terrestrial human beings, the derailed and the non-derailed. In human beings, D, F, and G. So we're gonna return to that. Just let me read this first one. I'll just go into this alphabet stuff. In human beings D, F, and G, we have seen the worst serious derailments. As representatives for the non-derailed beings, types remain, types that we will call human beings H and human beings I. These two terrestrial human types are expressive of the normal path within the epoch of sexual pole transformation. The human being H, in human being H, we have a being that in previous lives has not been exposed to or influenced by sexual seduction or phenomena that have been able to accelerate the speed of the opposite pole's development. So this is important here, I think, is those who have not been derailed have not been exposed or influenced by sexual seduction or phenomena. So what that means is that derailment, this sexual seduction is what causes the derailment in evolution. So this side of its development could therefore expand so as to have a capacity and an aspect of power within its nature that lay above or was stronger than its morality. It has therefore not had any particular difficulty in being in contact with the flock's so-called normal sexual life or the one-pole sexuality. Since the development of its poles does not take place at an unnaturally quick pace, this aspect grows in its psyche only quite unnoticeably and gradually, and does not make contact with the being's waking day consciousness until its very last incarnations before its initiation or experience of the Great Birth. And as long as the being's pole development has not come so far as to trigger this contact, it feels absolutely no sexual attraction to its own sex. So, I made this little chart today, so I did in Photoshop, so I didn't really have the arrows and stuff, so it looked a little winky dinky. So if that's disturbing to you, please forgive me. But what I'm going to try to show you with this is that we have these different human beings, the different evolutionary stages of the human beings from A to K, right? I'm not going to read all this, so I don't know if you can see that behind me, but guess I can, yeah. Anyway, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try to explain that with these eras, we start with A, and then we evolve, and you can either go from A to B or from A to C. Like if you don't get into the sexual seduction derailments, you can actually go from human being A to C to H, and then up to the I, J, and K. Okay, so that's like what Martinez calls the highway. And then, of course, there are the byways. If you get derailed, like if you go to B, I know you can't see it there, so I don't know if you can make it smaller or move it, and you can't read it. So maybe we can do it this way. At least you can see the B over here. So there's a B. And from B, you can go into these three. Yeah. So if we look at A, what is A? A is the human being state A is the starting point for the evolution of the poles. It's the zone of happy marriages. Only interest in its partner and offspring. Shows animosity towards members of his own sex, and stripped of neighborly love. Human beings A include people conscious of the existence of God, as well as people that denies the existence of God. Human beings A are mostly directed by instinct. So, so that's what we call the happy marriages zone, or the zone of the happy marriages. So if we have to point out in this symbol where that is, like if you see this first fat purple line that's a little fatter, that's underneath that is the animal kingdom, and then the first two stages in evolution above that, you see where the yellow comes in here and here, that's the happy marriages zone. So the next two is the unhappy marriages zone, and then the following two is the zone of infertility. And then we go into the real human kingdom, yeah? It's all yellow. So here, after many incarnations here as human beings A, we can go to human being C if we don't get derailed. So what is human being C? It's the zone of unhappy marriages. Changes partner often, the ability to stay in a marriage has reached a high level of degeneration. The beings here are unsuited as marriage partners. Their desire for mating has not decreased, and they still seek the experience of mating bliss in its traditional form. Since their evolutionary stage, sorry, I was a couple of typos here. Since their evolutionary stage is quite high spiritually, they often exhibit self-sacrificing and beneficial creative behavior towards society. Some are geniuses of art, science, and technical areas. The human beings see who do not have an authentic connection to God, see an increased risk of being derailed. So what she's saying here is, I mean, this is not materials, but it's like a concise extract from the Book of Life 5. It's many chapters she talks about this, about, I believe it starts in the section 1750, around there. It goes through the 1800s. So it means here that if you don't have a close relationship to God, of like if you don't pray and believe in God and really has that inner sense that there's something more than the physical, there's something higher, that you're actually an eternal being, and you have an eternal I, and you live like many lives, yeah. So that continuancy, if you're lacking that connection and knowing that it's all good here, you have an increased risk of being derailed. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you don't just go on to human being H, which is what? They have never been sexually derailed, have always been heterosexual. Derailment is now completely impossible. The opposite pole is highly developed, but has not entered into the day-conscious awareness yet. Moral code and neighborly love is highly developed, has great compassion for its own sex, but not particularly sexual. Do not fall in love as one-pole people, often a type of spiritual scientists, teachers, writers, and speakers are often in this category. When they, through evolution, become day-conscious aware of their opposite pole, they transition to the human being I stage, and so that they go on to that. And but what happens here, this is, and I want to get into this today, and then you can go back and read this from the chart, just make a still where the whole chart was up. And because I'm not going to get into reading that today, but there is a way that you can just go this way, this way without becoming derailed and just go all the way to the K, right? But if you don't, you can get derailed here in A, you can get derailed here in C, but you cannot get derailed in H, evolutionary state H, and you cannot get derailed in E either. Because what is E? They have been sexually derailed earlier, so the people here are sexually vacillating between, that means they're changing or shifting between the opposite sex and its own sex in sexual preferences. Derailment of any kind is now impossible. Their sexuality is discreet and caring. They do not fall in love, as one-pole people do. They have reached a situation where intellectuality, moral code, and its relationship to God directs its sexuality. They have thus started to see the human being behind the person, and is therefore attracted by the human being now. Often becomes a genius of art or science, often leaders of religious movements. So these are the two ones. Once you're here in E or H, cannot be derailed anymore. So the dangers are if you're in A or C or B. So what happens if you don't get derailed in A, you go to C, don't get derailed in C, you go to H, and then you go on to IJK, and you're home free, right? You have cosmic consciousness in I already, or no, J, I mean. So, but if you're in A, get derailed, you end up in the evolutionary stage that Martinez terms human being B. And what are those? They have gone through a certain amount of evolution of its intelligence, which is pole evolution, the orange and, not the orange, the yellow and the green that we talked about in the beginning of the symbol. So they're not all green or yellow, there's a little more further ahead, yeah. They are selfish, do not acknowledge the existence of God. That's how they ended up in this derailment. They're deficient moral code. They are cosmically unconscious and cosmic corpses. That's what Martinez calls it. Often end up as gangsters and bandits. Constitute the seed for further derailment of any kind. So in this stage, because you don't have this God power or the prayer with you, you end up here in this derailment. And then from here you can go further into derailments of either D, F, or G. So if you take the first one, D, they're not interested in normal marriage. Often unhappy people have been sexually seduced, like we read about in the text. The opposite pole has gained dominance. So what that means is the opposite pole, which if it was a man would be the feminine pole, that has gained dominance. But that's not supposed to happen until you have cosmic consciousness, and actually never supposed to happen. Well, not, yeah. So, but you're not supposed to have more of the opposite pole. So that's an imbalance, right? So the opposite pole has gained dominance. Not good. It's because you're not morally developed, right? Just right here, it said right here you would have a deficient moral code. So your morals are lacking. So not good when the opposite pole has gained dominance. They are homosexuals in the traditional sense and appear as masculine females and feminine men. So that was one, but then from there you can again shift either to that one or that one, right? Either to the C over there or to the F. Like if you really go more and more into the darkness here, what happens if you go from D to F? Well, then The sexual drive consumes the willpower of the individual and dominates over the moral code and connection to God. The opposite pole is very dominant, and sexual partners are both sexes vacillating. That's the word Martinez used. They have a loathing for work and take advantage of their sex partners. There are abuses of alcohol and drugs, often turn into human wrecks and become insane, mentally retarded, and weirdos in their next incarnations. So this has ramifications into their next incarnations, not just the next one, maybe 2, maybe 3 following. But you can still go back to D and then to C and up, right? But or you can go straight to E, or you can go even further into derailment, and that's the furthest you can get. It doesn't get darker than this. Human being G. They are people of extreme derailment who, due to their lack of sexual sensitivity, practices of violence and torture. They are often murderers, arsonists, and sadists, possessed by a diabolical psyche. So, that's what we're going to read about today, and how do these people get better. Go back to F, back to D, back to C, up to the E, right? See the errors, and then up to the I, J, and K. I mean, maybe just for good measure, read the I, J, and K. Let's get a little silver lining on the dark clouds here. Human being I, of all the human beings not initiated, it is the most evolved. Derailment is impossible. Talent for neighborly love and moral codex is very highly evolved. They are day conscious, aware of its opposite pole, feel as much sympathy for members of its own sex as for its opposite sex, but cannot fall in love and do therefore not seek the one-poled form of sexual satisfaction, which is mating love, right? To produce offspring. That's what we have down in A, right here. Only interest is in partner and offspring. So now we have evolved out of that, and we have here, you do not seek the one-poled form of sexual satisfaction. They experience the human being behind the individual. So the man doesn't see a woman, a man sees a human being, right? Or a woman doesn't see a man, but she sees a human being. So these are two human beings seeing each other, regardless of sex or gender. So they show great love towards plants and animals and advocate a plant-based diet, have cosmic glimpses, have full control over both areas of its poles. Through the experience of cosmic consciousness, the individual becomes a human being, J. So, and that leads to J. The beings here, human beings J, have attained cosmic consciousness. So that's what we saw in the star in the symbol. We see how this star is there. That symbolizes cosmic consciousness. So the Earth is going this way towards the star. Once it reaches the star, it attains cosmic consciousness, and then inevitably we all attain cosmic consciousness as well, because we're nerve cells on the planet. But we can also experience cosmic consciousness before the Earth as little cells in the Earth body, right? Here we see how the star reappears, the same star symbolizing cosmic consciousness. That's the same place in evolution. So we as human beings can evolve into more and more love, more and more yellow, less and less animal-like nature, less and less orange, less and less killing, and eventually we get through the gates of this fat line here into the real, see this fat, little, so fatter than the other violet lines. Once you get through this gate, which Martinez calls the Great Birth. That is where we attain cosmic consciousness. That's the Great Birth, the cosmic birth. He calls it also the cosmic baptism of fire, the golden baptism of fire. So, and once we're in here, we're home free. This is the kingdom of heaven, the new earth. So, the best is yet to come here. We can, as human beings, like Martinez had attained this level of consciousness, and that's what enabled him to see all these invisible laws and principles and be able to communicate them through us through these symbolic drawings and the book of life, the Third Testament, comprising about 9,000 pages. So there's lots of stuff to read if you want to see what cosmic consciousness can tell you. We don't have cosmic consciousness that yet, we humans. Most humans, Martinez says, is right here in these two levels here, which are the unhappy marriage zones. So very few are in here and almost none in here. So there's still a long way for us to go before we reach the star. Let me read this last one. J. They have attained cosmic consciousness, have become fully double-poled. They are absolutely perfect spiritually, no longer functions as a distinctly male or female being. They have become what Martinez calls double-poled, or the new gender. Sexually, the human being J functions as the human being I, more or less, until it is physically completely evolved and has become a human being K, who is fully capable of experiencing the highest fire. So the highest fire we talked about in another talk, it's the pleasure, anything pleasure, any satiation of a hunger that you have, it releases a satisfaction or a state of bliss, which is the highest fire. So any satiation, satisfaction of a hunger that you something you're longing for, when that gets satisfied, you experience what Martinez calls bliss or the highest fire. Last stage here, human being K. Human being K is the fully evolved double-pole human being that goes for both the spiritual side due to its cosmic consciousness, and it goes for its physical side, since the human being K is a more evolved version of the human being J, in such a way that the body now has developed a sensitivity to experience the highest fire through the mere touch of a fellow human being on the same level of evolution. The sexual organs are now only organs without any function. Bliss is exclusively experienced through bodily touch of another human being. The human being K shifts between the physical and spiritual plane using materialization and dematerialization, controlled by willpower. So I think Martinez was only a human being J. So this is even beyond the evolutionary level of Martinez, so it's not really something that we practice on this planet yet, but we're all going to get there. Inevitably, it might take some time, but we get there. Actually, already when we think thoughts, we're practicing this taunt for materialization and dematerialization, because when we think the thought, you actually materialize the vibration in your consciousness, and then when you stop thinking a thought, that vibration dematerializes out of your energy field. So that's kind of a talent when you're already practicing. So it's not like far-fetched. It's just we're in kindergarten, and maybe that's the PhD book that we need to write. Yeah. So can't really ask a kindergartner to write that yet, right? So let's read this again, or continue with the yeah, let's just read it again because now it makes more sense. Yeah. Um, all uninitiated terrestrial human beings are on their way to this experience of life or initiation. Cosmic consciousness, as we have seen, one can be derailed on this way. We see therefore two groups of terrestrial human beings, the derailed and the non-derailed. In human beings, D, F, and G, we have seen the most serious derailments. As representatives of the non-derailed beings, types we call H and I. These two terrestrial human types are expressive of the normal path within the epoch of sexual pole transformation. So, in human being H, we have a being that in his previous lives has not been exposed to or influenced by sexual deduction of phenomena, and that have been able to accelerate the speed of the opposite pole's development. So that's what caused the derailments, right? So let's look at the derailments now. When a being's moral development and relationship to God are inferior to its sexual drive, so that it is more this drive than morality that masters its will, another type of human being emerges. We will call this type human beings F. So that's the one way over, and cannot get more dark than that, the diabolical psyche. They're possessed by a diabolical psyche. Yeah? The pole structure of this type, as in the above mentioned type, vacillates. So they're shifting. Since they have neither a strong relationship to God nor a morality that can act as a protective safeguard against the exercising of their overproportioned, wayward sexual will, they are entirely at the mercy of their sexual urges. They are thus vulnerable to all manner of derailments from the straight and normal line or path of evolution. For these beings, marriage is no longer the principal foundation of life. They have no particular desire to create a home or family. They are beings who very often experience broken engagements, since they are also very much in the process of becoming conscious of their opposite pole. They often go off the rails by prostituting themselves with their own sex. This disreputable way of life increases a tendency in these beings to feel a loathing for normal, healthy work. We therefore find that many of these beings are chronically unemployed, perpetual idlers who make a habit of frequenting the public laboratories in big cities in order to look for sexual customers and fertile soil for all kinds of financial tricks or fraud with which they try to find a kind of replacement for the income they do not want to earn through honest or morally sound healthy work. Because of the state of their poles, some of the people in this group have a very lively imagination, but since this is outside any superior moral and intellectual control, the human beings F do not become geniuses, virtuosos, or outstanding leaders like the human beings E. On the contrary, they become psychopaths, or beings that in a very exaggerated way regard themselves as heroes in all situations and proclaim themselves to be such. They fabricate long, fanciful stories in which they themselves are great heroes. They dabble a lot in art. Indeed, some want to be artists at all costs, even though they have neither the talent for it nor can afford to be artists. It is not so much the art itself that is the object of their desire, as it is having people regard them as artists. We therefore see in some cases these beings assembling all the trappings of artists in order to create an outer camouflage that can give their fellow beings the impression that they are great artists. One sees them with very conspicuous, I guess, painting equipment, uh, a big artist's hat, a full beard, and the rest of the entire masquerade by means of which they think they can create very much the appearance of being a great genius. There is just the difference that true geniuses are, as a rule, rather ordinary in appearance. Indeed, sometimes these beings are so taken up with their art that they more or less neglect their appearance and are not very particular on how they look. They have long since grown away from being swayed by people's opinions and are completely unaffected by whether people think they are artists or dabblers. Only with this sovereignty can the true genius thrive and express itself. Outer camouflage is of course absolutely essential to the previously mentioned beings that want to be admired and honored for a genius that they do not possess at all. But this camouflage is thus erected around a manifestation of a complete lack of talent. The beings concerned will not therefore attain the highest pinnacles of art for the time being. In the most fortunate cases, they remained merely dabblers in whatever they do. Since they cannot earn a living as dabblers and at the same time think that they have far too great a talent for them to be able to live as ordinary workers, they thus end up in the financial mess of Group F, with its fear of disreputable drives for self-preservation and ways of earning a living. This in turn ultimately results in these beings becoming depressed and therefore, in the worst cases, having to stimulate themselves by drinking, becoming drunkards, alcoholics, or slaves of other life-destroying products, thereby ending up as veritable human wrecks. In future lives, these beings will in turn manifest themselves as being more or less mentally disabled, as eccentrics, as backward pupils in school, as physical weaklings, all according to the nature of their derailment. The underlying, most profound, and true cause of this entire motley panorama of mental and physical effects is thus the state of the being's poles. So the two sexual poles again, right? These beings have all more or less lost the inspiration and joy in living and the ensuing stimulation to create a marriage, home, and family that maintains the so-called normal man's and woman's desire to work, their common sense, and their normal way of living. And since they are, as regards morality and their relationship to God, still almost dead beings, this morality or relationship to God cannot give them any inspiration or any particular desire to work either, over and above a tendency to play the hero, and, here too, to sink down into the disappointments, degradation, and financial misery of their psychopathic illusions, which in turn at worst means depression and suicide in this life, and an existence in the next that as previously mentioned, means mental disablement or an abnormal state for these beings. So this has ramifications into the next incarnations, yeah? The prospects are thus not very bright for those who today are careless with the state of their sexual poles. Godlessness and ignorance of this sphere is modern man's greatest and most dangerous shortcoming when forming his future fate. Here we would do well to remember the old adage, therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. A state that is further offshoot of the sphere of human beings, F, reveals an even more drastic picture of how things turn out when human beings live without understanding the power of prayer and are wholly devoid of any spiritual interest or hunger. At the same time as they have also lost the foundation of life that is a source of inspiration for the majority or flock, or that promotes their zest for life, namely, an intimate life with the opposite sex. In no zone whatsoever is the being so exposed to becoming derailed as in the sexual zone F. A human being F cannot have an intimate life with its own sex, since its relationship to this sex has long since become more or less habitual prostitution, which, in the most fortunate of these cases, is merely an extended form of masturbation. This extended form of masturbation cannot continue to satisfy. It must continuously be developed further and further by new experiments that derail its originator correspondingly more and more. So this is where it goes from F to G, right? The normal sexual reaction to natural intercourse or ordinary masturbation can thus no longer give the being sufficient sexual satisfaction. The sexual organs can no longer react sufficiently to a normal sexual stimulus. In order to experience sexual release, the being must therefore increase the tension connected with its sexual experience. This increased tension cannot be attained through the ordinary caresses, kisses, and smiles that form the basis for natural sexuality. On the contrary, for the derailed being, this sympathetic attitude can be outlived to such an exaggerated extent that it actually has a relaxing effect rather than an animating one. The being therefore cannot possibly, through this means alone, attain the sexual arousal that is needed in order for sexual release to occur. The derailed being must therefore now resort to means that work in exactly the opposite direction. Since the opposite of caresses is brutality, brutality and violence will then increasingly form the basis for this being's sexuality. Indeed, it can ultimately no longer get any sexual release at all without being brutal and violent to its sexual partner during intercourse, which in reality is no intercourse at all, but an attempted murder, if not actual murder. But that's it for a little while. So we're in the human being G stage. It doesn't get darker than this, right? So how do we help these beings that are there? Because they need to move on in evolution and get up there and get cosmic consciousness, right? Get on to the next stages. How do we help them? The being has become a sadist. Stranglings and other sadistic manifestations are rife in this part of the zone of sexual transformation. The use of violence and torture, the committing of murder and killing, have become the highest pleasure or experience of life. This derailment or debauchery has many ramifications and individual manifestations, all according to the particular psyche, environment, and abilities of the various derailed people, just as there are also beings that have grown accustomed to being tortured or whipped in order to attain sexual release. Pyromaniacs belong to the milder stages of this derailment. Here too, the exaggerated unnatural thrill forms the basis for the sexual release of the beings in question. But the tension or thrill of seeing a fire, of being a secret arsonist, does not continue to suffice. Ultimately, animals or people have to perish in the fires they cause, and thus the being now becomes a homicidal arsonist. Sexually insane, it reaches the culmination of torturing and destroying life in the same way as the other sadists who are their culmination do. There must be a little typo there. Deeper into the culmination of abnormality and darkness can no being come. Heaven has become something evil, while hell has become the greatest experience of life. Here, the future human being in God's image is passing through a diabolical stage. We will call these terrestrial human beings who are possessed by a diabolical psyche human beings G. Of course, this is not the end station for these beings, right? They need to move on. How do these derailed beings return to normality? This is the last one here. How do these derailed beings return to normality? To the Godhead, to love. How do they come back to God's source? Indeed, how does the prodigal son return to the Father? When a pitcher is full of water, it cannot be filled up any higher because the water would run over. The same law has the effect that the trees do not grow to the sky. When a human being has transformed their psyche so as to feel that torture, carnage, and killing are the greatest pleasure, whether it itself is the object of the sadism or it makes others victims of it, it has arrived at the very limit of the unfoldment of the killing principle. It has arrived at hell itself, at the very culmination of darkness. Beyond this culmination, only the zone of love can exist. Just as the killing principle or the zone of darkness can exist only beyond the zone of love. Within the domain of the cycle, only two great combinations exist. So that's the spiral cycle, right? Alternating between light and darkness. Namely, the combination of darkness and the combination of light, and the transitional zones between them. After having become accustomed to such a horrendous way of experiencing life as that of the sadist, it is not very easy to break the habit of it. So these are addicts. You're addicted to this hell. But the horror and loathing the being sick or derailed nature gradually instills in its surroundings, and the terrible karma that this in turn causes, will indeed give rise to depression and in the worst case, suicide, quite apart from the mental disablement or mental defect that it will experience in subsequent lives. This entire culmination of suffering and spiritual darkness cannot but gradually make the all-surviving I in the being scream and cry out to return to a normal zest for life. And through this increasing desire for a normal existence, the being's mental or spiritual course will inevitably be changed, and from the sufferings of purgatory, of hell and sadism, the prodigal son now returns once more to his father, to life, to true happiness and joy, and can from here continue his path onwards and forwards in the vast trajectory of the spiral cycle. So here we can continue out again from this G stage right here, right? See the G? We're just talking about that. Diabolical psyche. There's an arrow back here, a little to the F, a little lighter, and then you can go to D, or you can go to E, and then you can continue from D to C. You can go to E, from C you can go to H, and you can continue your evolution up, up, up into the light, yeah? So, and that is the spiral cycle, yeah? Going into more and more light, going from orange to yellow, gradually going into the light, into the heaven on earth, the real human kingdom, true human kingdom, the yellow here, right? Where neighborly love prevails. And I think I'm going to end with that. And just a little food for thought, because you see how here's God is the white, is the eternal, right? X1. And we're all one with God at all times, but we're not always conscious that we're one with God. So these beings just have to re-experience and reconnect that they are in fact eternal beings, that they're always one with God. They just have to reconnect with that conscious awareness that they are. And then these human beings, G, will get better and continue their evolution, okay? So with that in mind, we continue with March Madness, and what is this, 321 today, 3/21/2020. It's going to be exciting what's on the news, what's on the real news, and see you soon and stay safe.